Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today we've got a lovely lady for you, a lovely guest, Catherine Young. Welcome to the show, Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and Catherine is a therapist, does a lot of work with families, with parents and kids, and adoption's kind of one of your speciality areas from what I can gather from looking you up on site and as we've talked. So today we're going to be talking. So this episode really is going to be for adoptive parents listening, and I want to start by asking you a question, if I may, Catherine. So, what comes to your mind when you hear this phrase, "thriving adoptees"?
Yeah, thriving adoptees. Well, I work, as you said, primarily with children and their families and helping the children. And for me, thriving, excuse me, for me, thriving adoptees, when I think of children and I think the work I do, is when the adoptees, the adopted children are able to form relationships, are able to move forward in their life, kind of move towards their potential, then they're thriving adoptees. Sometimes, in the work I do, is often with children who have what I've termed as attachment injuries or big challenges in their early attachment history that often gets in the way of them moving forward in a healthy way, particularly in the area of relationship, in the area of family. So for me, for the children I work with, if I can see that they are developing a healthy relationship with their parents, which then extends out into their peer group, so on and so forth, then for me, that's a thriving adoptee.
Yeah. Okay. I love the way that you're rippling out. You're rippling out from the child to their parents, to their peer group, and I guess to their extended family as well. You know, like grandparents
Sure.
and stuff like that. And so, yeah, we are. And you also use this, a favorite word of mine, potential, right? Potential.
Mm-hmm.
So we're helping kids move towards their potential. So this is beyond surviving to thriving and achieving what they want to achieve out of life. So this, you know, you're looking at the individual child. You're looking at their ability to form relationships, and I guess the relationships are the basis for their dynamism, I guess, is it? I don't know, how would you see it? So what, given clearly we're talking to adoptive parents listening, they're not, this isn't a child experiencing one of your interventions or one of your sessions. I know you're into doing some play therapy and all this sorts of things. So the kids, this isn't a therapy session. What we're trying to do here is give the parents the information that they need to know, and the wisdom that you've picked up over the years, the wisdom that you continue to pick up about that. It seems it all stems back from that relationships. That was the starting point of where you were at. So what can you share with parents in terms of that relationship forming, the strengthening, the bonding, the attaching? What can you say about that?
Yeah, a good question. And I have written a book specifically for parents that has a lot of this, well, more information than I'm obviously going to be able to give today. But so if we go back and if we're looking at a child that had really disrupted early attachment, possibly early trauma, but if we go back and look at a child, sort of the typical developmental path for children for relationship with their parents, that the very young child, the way we interact with that child is we we make funny noises, they make noises back. We do a lot of mirroring with the children. We do a lot of touch, right? We hold them to soothe them. We play with them. We throw them, not too far up in there, but we put them up and down, and we're doing all this movement. We're singing to them. We're using kind of rhythm kinds of things. We're, giving them a little ride. All those things are ways that the relationship develops, and it's a two-way street. So not only, like, we wouldn't look at that baby and go, "Hi, little baby," if the baby didn't react in a way and like smile at us or make a noise and try and make the same noise as us. So it's an interactive process, and through that interactive process, we've got our neurons firing in our brain. The baby has neurons firing in their brain, and they're developing sort of a way, they're developing the parts of their brains associated with relationship. So if you bring a child into your home that perhaps hasn't had some of those early experiences, you want to use some of those elements. And the elements I've identified are eye contact, touch, definitely touch. Touch is like the primary touch, eye contact, mirroring, and rhythm and singing. So one of the first things I suggest parents do is add more touch if they can, assuming the child, we always want to respect the child's boundaries as well. We're not going to force any kind of touch, as positive as we're trying to be on a child. But if they can increase touch in a way that the child will accept, that's one way towards starting to increase the connection, because touching is connecting, right? In the therapy and in the work I do with parents and children, we do a lot of games. If we're talking about an older child, for instance, maybe a 7, 8, 9-year-old, or even a 6 or 4-year-old, we do a lot of games like clapping games. Because with a clapping game, you're including touch, you're including rhythm, you're including mirroring, you're doing all those things at the same time. So you can start to include attachment, what I call attachment-based play. And also on my website, there's a whole long list of attachment-based play activities. So that's one thing you can just do from the get-go that's pretty easy to do. Kids like to play, they like to engage for the most part. So that's, I think, would be sort of one step.
Yeah. Okay. So fascinating stuff. You used the word process there, and I thought that's an interesting word, because I like a process. We all like processes somehow. It gives us some sort of comfort. But and as I was listening to you, it sounded to be far more intuitive, far more relational, far more kind of experimental, far more, seat of the pants stuff, but seat of the pants in a good way. So somebody once, I heard this story from somebody else, like, it sounds like you're flying by the seat of your pants. And that's like, and that's, normally in adults, we think that's a bad thing. And this guy said, well, yes, I am. But your pants were built to fly. That is how humans learn stuff. We learn stuff by exploring and experimenting. And you were talking a lot about the feedback loop. So being highly kind of attuned, not kind of being highly attuned, and and following the adjusting and fine tuning. And I was thinking about what do they call it, like a high wire walker, where they've got the stick in front of them, but they're never actually stationary. They're always adjusting. They're in a constant fine tune mode, rather than, we think a process is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, no, what you're talking about is far more, it's a feedback loopy kind of stuff. So that's how it kind of seemed to me. But I wondered, how could you talk into that? Because me and my wife haven't got any kids, right? So I really haven't got a clue on this stuff. I'm relying on you as the expert. And
Yeah.
that's
Well,
that's why you're on, because of your book, right? So that's
well,
how
thank
I
you.
find Catherine, because of the book, and there's links to the book in the show notes. But today we're
Yeah.
talking about Catherine and what she's learned, and yeah,
Yeah, you make a really, really, really good point as far as um, I think to do really good work with children who have had these kind of early injuries, it needs to be experiential. Someone can tell someone 1,000 times, I love you. And that's not necessarily going to sink in. It's going to be the interactions. It's going to be, and especially for a young child, right? Um, it's going to be the interactions. It's going to be the quality of the interaction and the nature of the interaction that's going to give that message much more strongly, particularly for a child. Um, and that's been some of the challenges with many of the traditional child therapies. They often remove the child from the parent, work with the child alone. They're not working dynamically in the relationship, and they're not able to address this particular need for these children. But this is where the children I've worked with have been most injured. So this is what needs to be addressed most primarily. Um, so yes, I think you make a really good point. It's not let's take the child, fix the child, quote unquote, right? And then, send them back to mom. It's no, let's bring parent and child in. Let's work with them on developing this relationship. And it's a two-way process. So the parent needs to be there. Now, I have worked with children that don't have a committed parent, and that's a slightly different process. So I'm not going to get into that today. But yeah, if you've got a parent who's committed or a caregiver who's committed, and is willing to do the work, you bring them in, and it is a dynamic process. Now, in my work, I do also bring in a cognitive piece as well, but I always start the session with that attachment-based play we talked about, so that week after week, the child is getting that kind of input and developing those neurons in their brain to develop that area of relationship.
yeah. So I came up with a nice little saying, as I was listening to, because I'm always trying to tease out I like a sound bite, but a sound bite with depth behind it, right? Not just sound bite. And what I came up with, love is felt, not heard. So it's not about what we say; it's about who we are, and the feeling that the kids get for us. So
Yes.
clearly, as you say, you're working often with the child and the parent. What can you share with parents who, maybe mild, a long way away from you, in terms of what you've learned from that
Yeah,
they can apply themselves?
sure. Yeah, so think about relationship, think about your own relationships, and think about what has been barriers in relationship and what has helped build those relationships. And for most people, I think they'll think one of the primary basis for relationships is safety. So that's something parents need to look at in their home and in their relationship with their child. What creates safety? Things like consistency create safety, even if the child is pushing against consistency because they're maybe trying to gain a sense of control. Because for children and for anyone really who's trying to gain a sense of control in their environment, they're actually seeking safety, because if we feel in control, we feel like we're safer, even if we're not, even if it's an illusion, right? So creating safety in the home, and so looking at that as like consistency, everything like voice tone, um, how you talk to your child. One of the very common recommendations, not just for me, but from many people, is to get down to the level of your child when you're talking to your child, so you're not like looming over them. So think about what is safety in your home. Also, the way other children interact. I was working with a child that was in a group placement situation, and their philosophy was really good, but the way it was implemented, there was so much chaos, and this child had early trauma that it was way too triggering for the child. It wasn't that it was overtly unsafe, but there was so much going on, and there was kids running around, and it was so chaotic that this particular child, it didn't work. So look at what's happening amongst the other children, kind of what's is can you create a calm environment? So again, looking at safety, and also particularly interpersonal safety. I encourage eye contact with a child, but the kind of eye contact like where you're staring at the child and you're saying, you look at me, is not a safe eye contact, and it's not going to create the safety they're going to avoid, or they're going to see eye contact as like a scary thing, not a positive thing. So you really you have to do a lot of self-monitoring. And then one thing I do want to say also is you can do all the right things and your child may not respond the way you expect them to respond or want them to respond. So being aware of that, and knowing that it's a process and over time, a continual process over time. But so I think focusing on safety, adding touch would be two sort of cornerstone pieces for working with a child.
So how can parents listening get a feel for safety, for what makes them feel safe? So they're kind of like they're stepping into their kids' shoes almost. So like how can you use the word fix my child? You use the phrase fix my child. And
right.
I know people doing similar. I had a lady on the show that's doing similar sorts of things to you, even though people know that that's what she's going to do. She's going to, but it is all going to be about what the parent does, who the parent is. That person knew that, but they rang. All parents ring this lady up. She's into this TBRI stuff, right? The parents ring them up and say, fix my child. The message is, and it's you barking up completely the wrong tree, right? And people are barking up and I always say that my relationship with my wife depends on me, right? I can influence myself more than I influence my kids. So this is like self-awareness. So how can a parent explore safety for themselves? What sort of questions? What self-reflection? I don't know. I'm not sure. Am I giving you enough to go on here, or am I giving you? Sometimes I'm a bit patronizing and give people
no. No, that's a really good question. What I'm hearing you ask is like, how can parents get us? Like, parents may not even be aware that their voice tone, for instance, or that the way they're posturing is causing anxiety for their child, or that the way they're interacting may be causing anxiety for their child. So this is, a good chance to reflect back for themselves when they were a child. In what relationships did they feel safe, and what made them feel safe in those relationships? We all, as children, we have many relationships, and maybe it was a parent. That's great. Maybe it was a teacher that they felt particularly safe with, and what made that feel safe, so they could reflect on that. I do want to kind of bring up a point. I do want to validate for some parents, like this idea of like, fix my child. Yeah, we kind of cringe when we hear that, right? Because we're like, it's a child, it's not an object to be fixed. At the same time, for children who've had severe enough early disrupted attachment or trauma, there is something that's not working for them. And so sometimes I think it might be a recognition of that. Like there's some pain for this child. I want you to help my child move forward and not be stuck. And so I do want to validate that kind of concern, which is a valid concern. And it's like, I've tried all the things that I've tried with my other children. It's not working for this child, so I don't know how to move forward. But really, more broadly, it's like, help me, help my child, help us move forward because we're stuck. But yeah, I do want to validate that, that sometimes, just like adults, sometimes adults have huge issues that they need help with, and sometimes children do too. So sometimes it's the parent just recognizing this child needs something more. So,
Yeah, but the solution is going to come from us, isn't it? I mean,
yeah,
we have to experiment and try
yeah,
different solutions.
yeah,
The
exactly.
the other thing that came to mind when you were talking about fine tuning and being present to how our child is responding, there was something kind of leapt out at me is that this fine tuning it's an ongoing thing. It's not like so it's like it's like a tennis game in terms of you're getting feedback. Either you win the point or you lose the point. It's a constant toing and throwing,
Yeah,
rather than a marathon where we
sure.
don't look at a watch and then are surprised that we've done it in 4 hours when we thought we were going to do it in 3.5. So it's
Yes,
that that's a constant adjustment and the constant tweak. And the thing
absolutely.
that popped into my head on that was something I heard from a business coach I had years ago, which is um, I think communication is the response we get. So instead of thinking that we're looking at how the child responds as our gauge to what we do next.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's 100%. And I also, for therapists, it's the same way. And when I work with therapists, I tell them at the end of the session, evaluate what worked, what didn't, because not everything's going to work, and not everything's going to work for every child. Same thing for the parent. At the end of your day, if you can take a minute, if you got a journal, oh, I had a good moment my child at this point. This seems to be what worked. Oh, we had a little bit of a blow up at this point. This didn't seem to work, or this is what I would like to have done different. A constant adjusting, to yeah, have the best outcome. Absolutely.
Yeah. So my metaphor was a bit off. So we're doing both. We are reflecting. That's what you're advocating.
Hmm.
Fine tuning moment by moment, being aware of the response that we're getting from our child, and fine tuning. And that this sounds really overwhelming, but your gut instinct is doing the hard work here.
Hmm.
This isn't your instinct. I think is doing the hard work. This isn't a thing that we're aware of. It's something deeper than that, right? So
Hmm.
there's a fine tuning in the moment, and we do that naturally, and more naturally as we get in sync with our kid. And there's a reflection period as well, where we look at the day or the morning or whatever it is, and yeah, and
Hmm.
the journaling is bringing out what um, our what would you call it? We're bringing our conscious awareness to
Sure.
what's going on. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So we're not acting just reflexively, or without, yeah, without sort of thought. And you mentioned marathon. In a way, it is also a marathon, especially with children who've had really challenging backgrounds, in that. And I understand your metaphor. Yeah, where in a marathon, you're not necessarily thinking every step, right? You're just kind of moving forward. But in the sense that it can be a fairly long haul, and the consistency of sort of the marathon, like one step after the other, is
yeah,
important. And the fact, and knowing that you're going for the long game, not the short game, and always being aware, like, are you giving up your long-term goals for short-term goals. Like, I'll give in to the child on this situation because I don't want to deal with the child throwing a fit, for instance, and yet you've sabotaged your longer term goals of having the child learn some boundaries or some, some learning to respect some rules or whatever.
Yeah. So here's where I didn't explain the metaphor quite right. So and I'm saying that there's two bits to the feedback. So there's the feedback that you get in the moment, like you get in a tennis match. I've gone 15 love up.
Sure.
It's now 15 all. Okay, so that's the feedback that you gain in the moment, and the marathon feedback is the kind of the more self-reflection at the end of the day.
Sure.
How am I doing, and know that I'm facing another day like that tomorrow. So this is all about stickability, and I think we're not really persistence is a really, to me, seems to be a really underrated thing.
Absolutely.
The Nike thing, well, we're on marathons, just do it, right? That what we're short-termism, I'm probably just talking about myself here, right? We're kind of like impatient. We're like, I get impatient in the swimming pool, for example. I get impatient sometimes on the way to the swimming pool. So it's that this diligence and persistence, and there's not a lot that you can say about persistence other than kind of sticking at it and just stick at it and just stick at it and just stick at it, which is probably why people don't really talk about persistence.
Yeah, I think though you make an excellent point. I think persistence is huge, is like so important, and consistency is really important. I mean, you do want to adjust if you need to, to meet the needs of your child, as that feedback loop we're talking about. But basically, for the parent, you want to be sort of this container for the child, this consistent container through which they can sort out their emotions or whatever, while you kind of are there holding that space for them in a consistent and safe way. And persistence is super important. And again, credit to a lot of the parents I've worked with. Some of them have been in therapy with their child for 1 or 2 years without progress. and so that shows some persistence. And then, they've come to me, and I will tell parents, give me, especially if they're kind of at their wits' end, they're like, I don't know if I can do this, because I've been persistent for 1 or 2 years and it hasn't shifted. I'll say 10 weeks. I tell my therapist to tell them 12 weeks. Give me 10 weeks. That's a short time in the life of a family, right? It may feel like a long time, but it's a short time. Give me 10 weeks of showing up consistently with your child. And at the end of that 10 weeks, not that everything can be solved, but if you see enough of a shift towards relationship or towards whatever our goals are, that you feel like, okay, this shows some hope. Because then it is a long, depending on the child. I've had children I've worked with, shortest has probably been about 6 to 9 months, but longest has been over quite a number of years, just depending on the early history and every person is different. But it can be quite a long slog. But if you go to a therapist and you've been working for a number of months and you're seeing absolutely no shift, sit down and talk to your therapist and say, this, I do need to see some. I'm willing to be persistent. I'm committed to this child, and I need to know that this is helping in some way. I also tell parents when they're looking to therapists, and like you said, not everyone's going to, there's different therapists all over the place. If the therapists make sure that they're attachment aware, adoption aware, that they kind of understand the dynamics. And if their model is to separate you from your child and spend 50 minutes a week with your child without you in the room, I think that's probably going to be a no-go for most children, certainly with all children with attachment challenges, early attachment challenges. So there's very little point in that? Maybe they'll learn some skills, but then they won't apply them because they're mad and they're still not relationally grounded. They need to be grounded in relationships. So that's something parents can look at too when they're getting therapy. Like, what's happening here? Are we relationship building? And are we making some kind of progress?
So a question's coming to me about persistence and creativity. So I am sometimes I don't change. I don't change my approach fast enough. So what I mean by persistence is sticking at the challenge in hand, and also being creative about how I tackle it. Does that make any sense?
Yeah,
What
it
are you
does.
talking? I can, because obviously I can talk into that from kind of my perspective as
Sure.
an adult adoptee, but it doesn't really mean anything to like a more a more apposite, a more relevant kind of take on it for an adoptive parent. You might be able to come up with something on that.
Excuse me. So I think what I'm hearing you say is that the persistence is not giving up. Basically, is like continuing to work on the issue and continuing to work on it, and also having creativity, willingness to try something different if what you're doing is not working. And I think both are important. You do need to give any kind of intervention enough time, because a child can outlast a parent sometimes like even just around setting a boundary, right? If the parent gives in too soon on that boundary, they've, you know, assuming it's an appropriate boundary, they've kind of lost the battle there. Yeah, so I think persistence and creativity together, I like that way of putting it, is important.
Yeah. And I want to share a bit of a sad story actually on this, in terms of like barriers and like overcoming barriers. So there was a piece in the newspaper here in the UK, in probably the biggest Sunday paper. So our population is like 70 million. 2 million people read this Sunday Times Sunday Times newspaper, or buy it. I mean, it's about an inch thick. Nobody reads all of it. But there's an article in there from an adoptive mum who was a trustee of a big adoption charity here in the UK, and she was really struggling with a child, and I thought, well, she's ideally placed as a trustee of the charity. She's ideally placed to solve the problem, and there's some government aided support here in the UK for adopted parents. And she was told that she couldn't get a therapist in her area, and I thought, oh, and then I thought, well, what I'm going to read next is the fact that so she went out of an area and found a therapist, and it didn't. It just said so. So we had to end I don't know what the PC term is, politically correct term. We had to end the adoption. We had to. It was judged a failed adoption, and I just thought how uncreative that parent was, and I also felt how bad that must have been. But the overriding feel, this was back in January, February this year. It was the overriding feeling right now is, well, is that all you've got? And sometimes, drastic times calls for drastic action and more creativity and a different solution. We have to persist.
Yeah.
We have to persist. We have to overcome. They're our kids. You can't hand them back. And
Yeah.
yeah, and
Let me speak to that for just a minute. Yeah, I mean, one of my yeah, failed adoptions are painful, and I think they're painful for everyone. No parent takes a child in their home with the intention of adoption with the plan to fail that adoption, right? So I think it's painful for everyone. I also I've had parents come to me, and when they first come, because they, and like they've been with this child for a while, and they say we're committed to this child. After we're about 3 or 4 weeks into it, and before the child's really made much shift, at, once they're comfortable with me, they admit, like, they often will say, I'm not sure we can do this. I'm not sure because this is causing chaos for our family. The child is acting out in such ways that we're having a hard time managing. The siblings are being affected. I'm up all night upset, because of what's happened during the day. And I want to validate that. And I've had success with those parents and those families. So really, what's really sad to me is that we have tried as a society, larger society, we've tried to use solutions that don't work for these children. We've tried to use solutions that are not appropriate to the needs of these children. And so adoptions fail. And I was talking to a friend not that long ago, and he was telling me about a friend of his where they had adopted a child. They did everything they could. They went to all the different therapists and and the child ended up in the juvenile justice system. And basically it was just sort of a disaster, the whole thing. And it was painful for everyone. And that's who I've developed my therapy model for, is for those parents that are committed and, and are committed to their child, and the children that need that level of help, that type of help. And so it's really a larger societal problem. It's like we're just starting to move in. I mean, attachment theory has been around for a while, but like really applying it to children is relatively new. Really applying it in a way that works is relatively new. So it is very, very sad. I mean, that's my whole hope, is to like save those placements, because a lot of those parents are very dedicated. They want to be there. They want this to work, with all their heart, but they just don't have the tools. No one has shown them the way, and the behavior becomes too problematic.
yeah. What do parents miss, do you think, that and I don't know if this is an impossible question or not, but I've started, so I'll finish. What do parents miss? What is it that there's, because I'm so much of a firm believer of this. I may be barking up the complete wrong tree, so just, if I'm speaking out and I'm wrong, then just tell me that. I'm big enough. I can say. I believe that kind of self-awareness is the pillar to everything, right? Pillar. It starts with us. My relationship with my life starts with me, and I believe that parents' relationships with their kids starts with their parents. They're the leaders. They're driving the bus, right? What is it that they miss? What is it that they fail to see, that can contribute to failed adoptions?
I think one thing that can contribute is taking things personally in the interactions, and if a child screams at their parent, "I hate you," they really mean, "I'm mad." But if the parent takes that to heart, like, and in a way that is just really hurtful to them, then they're going to respond out of a place of hurt, not out of a place of like the bigger adult, right? In the interaction. So I think looking at your own reactions and not taking everything personally. If you are talking about a child that has some injuries, seeing it that way, seeing this as a symptom of of an issue that they have that we need to work on, as opposed to that we need to work on, right, in the relationship. And you're right, relationship is absolutely a two-way process. And in a parent-child relationship, it's different than obviously than a peer relationship or a romantic relationship, in that the parent needs to provide a lot that the child can't. In this case, they need to provide the stability, they need to provide the sort of um, the measured response
Yeah.
to to behavior. They need to provide, they need to take the step in providing for these children, moving towards a relationship, because the child's not going to do it, because the child's been hurt in that very early relationship. So the child's not going to reach out and do that, doesn't feel safe. So the parent needs to make all those first steps. So there's a lot on the parent and a lot on the parent's plate. And I think get help, absolutely get help, but just just look for the right kind of help. Again, people who understand attachment challenges. So I think getting help, something that a lot of parents and families have told me have been like one of the best things, is actually respite. And that may sound counterintuitive, like taking a break from your child, but the child needs a break too, especially if there's like a lot of, if the relationship's intense in whatever way. And respite can really help, just taking a break, taking care of yourself. I think that's another reason sometimes an adoption may fail, is the parents having a hard time taking care of themselves in the relationship, taking the space they need, taking time to do whatever they do that refills themselves, because there's a lot of giving that has to happen, from any parent to any child, right? It's but ideally in a healthy parent-child relationship, the parent's getting something back from the child's laughing, the child's having fun with them, the child's responding to their interventions. And if that's not happening, that's what's really hard for parents. When that's not happening, they're not getting that back, and they just feel like they're getting drained. So feeding themselves, taking care of themselves, is super important.
So the two things that come to my mind as you're discussing this is well, the one thing that comes to my mind is perspective. That's kind of the word that comes to mind. So taking things not taking things personally requires a degree of perspective, a shift in perspective. Yes. Like a break away from a break away from our child through respite allows kind of space for perspective. So two things there that both help us to more perspective. And Catherine's just frozen there. Maybe she come back on. Hi.
Hello.
Hello again. Hello,
okay.
Hello, listeners. Zoom completely lost. So did you hear me talk about perspective?
I heard you start talking about perspective, and then it froze, and I didn't hear anything after that.
So you were talking about not taking things personally and respite. And to me, both of those are kind of things that give us perspective. So taking things personally or not taking things personally requires a perspective shift, like an insight, seeing something new for ourselves, right? That it's not our fault. It's not how we are. It's the kids' past trauma. That's the thing.
Yeah,
which is one of those things that sounds great in theory, but the difference between theory and practice is that there is a difference, right?
Yes, absolutely.
There is a difference.
It's always
There's no
easier
difference
to say
in
than
theory.
do.
There's no difference in theory, but in practice, there's always a difference. The respite care idea, strategy, whatever people call it, that provides some space for a perspective shift in the parent and the child, right? So what have you seen? What's your view on perspective shift? Because I'm a big fan of insights, and I think kind of strategies are the kind of the poor relation, shall we say. It's when things change for us, when we have that aha moment, when we see something new. That's the power that changes what we do. So I'm always trying to get upstream of the behavior.
Sure.
To the insight change that caused the behavior. What that's just my pet theory on this stuff. What can you share on that kind of subject?
Yeah, I agree. I think perspective is really key. Sometimes the perspective change needs to be from, okay, I plan to take this child in my family, and we're going to have this, sort of typical happy mom, dad, kids family, and everything's going to go smoothly. And if I'm just kind enough to this child, everything's going to be fine. And so then the perspective might need to be, oh, this child maybe needs something different. So that would be a perspective shift. Another perspective shift that I really try and that I think is really empowering for parents is going from a place of, sometimes they almost feel victimized by the behavior, right? By the whatever the trauma induced behavior is of their child, or the circumstances, or they feel stuck. But moving them to an empowered place and say, you know what? You're key in helping your child heal. If they can see themselves as an agency of healing, that perspective is really empowering and allows them to, again, sort of make that separation a little bit, enough that they can kind of see the issues more clearly, and also to act from that empowered place of, oh, I can be an agent of change here, as opposed to I'm a victim of, the trauma that's happened. So that's the perspective shift that I really like to see. Like, oh, I can actually be helpful here. I can do something. I'm not powerless in this situation. It's just understanding it from a different perspective than what I maybe thought when I got into this situation.
Yeah. So I mention something else about did I mention something about a business coach earlier on? Did I mention that? A coach? Something? I've had so many conversations today.
I don't specifically recall, but possibly.
Okay. So I remember a little word kind of strategy thing around I really love the agent of healing. I think that might be the name. Something along that line will be the name that will give the title for the podcast, right?
Nice.
So when we talk about empowerment, I heard this. I heard this. I saw this. It was a poster actually, and it said, it was, are you above the line or below the line? Are you above the line or below the line? And below the line, we had blame, excuses, and denial. Right. So this was a business context, right? This isn't a parenting context, but
sure,
kind of might help people with their kind of their self-awareness. Blame, excuses, and denial. Bed, right? BED. And then above the line was ownership, accountability, and responsibility, which spells or, like when we're rowing a rowboat.
Sure.
Yeah, you call them rowboats. We call them rowing boats, but I don't know why. why I flipped into the. Yeah. So think like it's a little self-evaluation tools that you can use, and I found it incredible, just like an internal model, a prompt for me to self-evaluate, self-reflect.
Yeah.
When am I blaming? When am I blaming others? And this, I was using this usually from it's like parents are leaders. I had a small publishing company with 5 staff, right? So this was about me and my relationships with the staff usually, and the clients. So when am I blaming? When am I blaming somebody else?
Yeah.
And the buck stops with me. I'm the small business owner, right? When am I blaming somebody else? When I'm making excuses for myself? When am I in denial? When am I denying that something is a problem? When have I got my head stuck in the sand? And then below, and then okay, and then on the positive stuff, when am I taking ownership? Is this a is this a potential to somewhere I can take ownership of, rather than, so in this perspective, it's the ownership maybe, okay, I've been using a therapist that only works with my child. What about talking to a therapist like Catherine, or Catherine herself, about who works with the parent and the child? And then I'm taking ownership. Then I'm taking accountability. Then I'm going to, instead of handing the accountability off to somebody else, as in fix my child, cringe, cringe, right? And then responsibility. Where am I upskilling? Where am I upskilling myself here? And I think you used the word hope at one stage. One of my challenges in this area is that I think that the adoption world has become kind of trauma obsessed, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just darkness, darkness, darkness. And I see that actually in all parts of the adoption world. I see that in adult adoptee Facebook groups, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I've been accused of toxic positivity when I just asked I asked a gentle question, right?
Yeah.
And they hounded me out, right? They hounded me. Well, no, they didn't hound me out. I asked. They asked me a question. I asked a question. They asked me a question back. Then they came for me. Then I apologized, deleted the question, my answer that had inadvertently caused some upset, and left the group. And as I was leaving the group, I saw a comment coming up saying, see, he hasn't even got the courage of his own convictions. He's leaving this group. No, I left the group because I had inadvertently caused somebody some challenge. So this trauma obsession is like, it seems to be endemic, not a pandemic, but endemic. And I believe that we should be kind of trauma informed. I think the word now is trauma responsive, isn't it? So trauma informed, trauma responsive, right? If you get your PC terms right, Simon, I've got to be on top of this. And hope obsessed.
Yeah.
Hope obsessed. That's about the future. You started off by talking about forming relationships so that we can move forward and help kids towards their potential. That's all about hope.
Yes.
We need to be that beacon of hope. And, how many hopeful victims, you talked about being an agent of change, an agent of healing, rather than a victim of the past.
Yeah. Yeah. Rather than a victim of the trauma-induced behavior that's happening in the home or whatever. Yeah. And I had a lot of thoughts while you were talking about that line of, the things above and the things below. Really, it's also a line from the way I see it, is feeling empowered or powerful and feeling powerless. When we're powerless, that's when we're going to blame. That's when we're going to do those kinds of things. So it's moving into that place of power, of your power. And so.
And not blaming ourselves when we're blaming, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, and people blame
not
themselves
criticizing
too.
ourselves for being below the line.
Yeah. And parents are really good at blaming themselves. I mean, I think any parent, I'm not talking about just, parents of children with trauma, but any parents are good at blaming themselves. And society blames parents, and, and that's actually an extra sort of challenge for parents who are working with children, or who have children who have challenging behaviors, because those behaviors are often not just in the home. They can be in school or whatever. Or Sometimes because the injury is in that primary relationship, sometimes the child will act out totally with the parent and then seem sweet and charming with everyone else, and the parent's going to get a lot of sort of blame. The child doesn't act that way with me, so what is mom doing or what is dad doing, to make the child do this? But it's really that that's injured behavior that's coming forward. But yeah, moving towards an empowered place and hope, I absolutely am hopeful. And this isn't just tooting my own horn. This is really about the model that I worked in, and I think any therapist, any anyway, any experienced therapist who's using this model can have success, I think, with these families. And if as long as I've had a parent who's both willing to physically show up and is committed to their child. I've worked with children with all kinds of behaviors, very aggressive behaviors towards peers or towards parents. I've had, all kinds of different behaviors and had success, been able to move to a place where, where they are grounded now in a relationship and they can learn to manage their emotions and they can, all those kinds of things. So I have a lot of hope. And what makes me sad is when I do hear about failed adoptions that likely could have been helped with the right interventions. And I don't blame parents for that at all, because it's just not, there's just not that much out there. And again, I had one family come to me and the child had been in play therapy for a year or two, and the therapist had told the parent that it was attachment based or something. But when we talked about what they did, I couldn't find any attachment based. I couldn't find any relationship building happening. So you just gotta be careful, look around, find the things that, what's going to help that child get grounded in that relationship, because that's where all children kind of start, is grounded in that first relationship, and then they are able to move outward from there into the world in a healthy way. So
brilliant. So I'm going to put a link into, as always, in the show notes. Listeners, check out the guests' website. Check out Catherine's book, and get in touch with her if that feels like it's the right thing to do. Catherine, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation. And I've got to. It's funny, isn't it, how this stuff sticks with you, like 15 years on since I heard that line about the the empowering stuff. So
yeah,
it's good. But I guess these are all just tools for our self-awareness. They're not tools to beat ourselves up with, right? I'm pretty good at beating myself up, right?
That's right. Give yourself a break, especially if you're a parent, no matter who you're parenting. If you're a parent, give yourself a break. Take care of yourself. And I enjoyed the conversation very much as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, listeners, and we'll speak to you again very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.